It was in 1990 that Michigan resident Dennis DePue became the subject of police manhunt after murdering his wife and dumping her body behind an abandoned schoolhouse. Story goes that the murder was an act of vengeance after his wife filed for divorce, with DePue shooting her in the back of the head. In Jeepers Creepers, the monster dumps the body behind an abandoned church, much the same way Dennis disposed of his wife. But it wasn't Dennis that inspired the film so much, as it was the testimony of two eyewitnesses who saw him dump the body. While driving around on a long stretch of Michigan Road, Ray and Marie Thornton spotted Dennis doing his dirty deed, and then found themselves followed by the killer, who suspiciously tailed them in his van for several miles. Sound familiar? Because it certainly should if you've seen Jeepers Creepers. Now what's most interesting about all of this is that the TV show Unsolved Mysteries ran a story on the DePue case in March of 1991, a full 10 years before Jeepers Creepers was made. The segment featured a reenactment of the Thornton story, which bears a striking resemblance to the first half of Salva's film. The opening sequence of Jeepers Creepers was directly lifted from the episode, right down to specific shots and dialogue exchanged. Like the Thorntons, the brother and the sister in the film even passed the time by playing the very same license plate game, making the inspiration undeniable. I was a bit shocked by this one. Freddy Krueger. When asked where they actually got the idea for Freddy's dream powers, Craven recounted an old news story he'd read about a family trying to get their lives in order after escaping Cambodia. But the family's son was haunted with post-traumatic stress that eventually killed him. From there, the genesis of Freddy Krueger was born. I'd read an article in the LA Times about a family who had escaped the killing fields in Cambodia and managed to get to the US. Things were fine, and suddenly the young son was having very disturbing nightmares. He told his parents he was afraid that if he slept, the thing would chase him and would get him. So he tried to stay awake for days at a time. When he finally fell asleep, his parents thought the crisis was over. Then they heard screams in the middle of the night, but by the time they got to him, he was dead. He died in the middle of a nightmare. Here was a youngster having a vision of a horror that everyone older was denying. That became the central line of Nightmare on Elm Street. Along with that reveal, Craven also opened up about the movie's positively insane twist ending and how much he hates it. According to Craven, he was completely against having Freddy win by taking over the convertible as those creepy kids sing the Freddy song, signalling Nancy was still trapped in the dream world as the credits rolled. Instead, Craven wanted to end a bit earlier, with Nancy having seemingly defeated Freddy by overcoming her fear. Bob wanted a hook for a sequel. I felt that the film should end with Nancy turns her back on Freddy and his violence. That's the one thing that kills him. Bob wanted to have Freddy pick up the kids in a car and drive off, which reversed everything I was trying to say. It suddenly presented Freddy as triumphant. I came up with a compromise, which was to have the kids get into the convertible, and when the roof comes down, we'd have Freddy's red and green striped on it. Do I regret changing the ending? I do, because it's the one part of the film that isn't me. Edward Gein was born in rural Wisconsin in 1906 and was raised alongside older brother Henry Gein. The boy's mother, Augusta Gein, is described in multiple accounts as a fanatical Christian woman who tried to strike the fear of God into her boys and prohibited them from interacting with people outside of school. Meanwhile, the boy's father, George Gein, has been called a weak man who couldn't hold down a job and never had a say in the way his sons were raised. Their isolation from the outside world didn't serve Edward well. When he had to interact in society, he was teased by classmates for being too shy, leading him to cling even closer to his mother. Despite Edward's admiration for Augusta, she reportedly thought very little of her own sons and assumed that they would turn out just like their father. When George Gein died in 1940, both of his adult sons were still living at home with their mother. At that point, Edward and Henry were forced to venture out into the community more often to pick up odd jobs to support their mother. Henry had more of an independent streak than his brother. He also often complained to Edward about their mother, but the younger brother always defended Augusta. Edward Gein's narrative began to grow more mysterious in 1944, when Henry suspiciously died. Both boys were apparently out battling a brush fire near their home when Henry went missing. Edward reported his brother's disappearance to the police, who then discovered a dead and bruised Henry on a patch of unburned land. Despite the questionable nature of Henry's death, local police reportedly couldn't fathom that Edward would have killed his own brother. The coroner ruled Henry died of asphyxiation, and Edward wasn't seriously questioned. After Henry's death, Edward and Augusta were all alone together on their farm, but only until 1945, when Augusta died from a stroke. This loss obviously hit Edward hard because he lost his only friend and one true love, and he was absolutely alone in the world. Following his mother's death, Edward sealed off every non-essential room in the house to preserve as shrines to Augusta. At this same time, Edward reportedly also became obsessed with dead people. He spent most of his spare time reading obituaries, learning about anatomy and head shrinking, and visiting local graveyards. According to the 1957 local newspaper article, Edward later admitted to exhuming at least 9 bodies while in dazed-like states. Edward reportedly also began identifying himself as a woman. He applied his knowledge of anatomy by skinning the faces from the woman he exhumed from graves and then using the skin as masks. This part later inspired the characters of Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. According to reports, Edward didn't like the way the skin from exhumed bodies was prone to cracking, so he started looking for fresh meat. In 1957, the decapitated corpse of Bernice Warden was discovered on Edward's property. Also found were a wastebasket made from human skin, bones made from human skulls, and clothing made from human body parts, the victim's heart in a saucepan on the stove, and a mask of human skin, which was identified as Mary Hogan's, a missing woman. Edward eventually admitted to accidentally shooting Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan, but claimed he couldn't remember specifics because he was in a daze at the times of their deaths. He said he stole the rest of the body parts from graves. However, he's been tied to the disappearance of 4 other people from the region. He was deemed emotionally impaired as a result of his upbringing and relationship with his mother. He spent the rest of his life at the Mendota Mental Health Institute. Hi guys, Miss Night Terror here. I hope you enjoyed something a little bit different today. I absolutely love horror films, and to know that they're actually based on real stories, it's scary in its own little way. Psycho, absolutely amazing film. It's old, but it's a classic. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. I didn't even realise that it was actually based on a real person. That makes it even more creepier. If you did like it, give us a thumbs up. Also share it with all your friends. And yeah, leave us a comment as well. If you have any stories, let me know. I'm still waiting for stories. And I'll see you soon. Bye.